One of the most common questions I get from people is what is that snap, crackle, or pop that you hear when you're doing an arm circle, or maybe there's a little bit of grinchiness in your neck or something? We've invited an expert to explain that snap, crackle, or pop that you might be wondering about. We're having advice from Dr. Bridget Dungan. She's a DPT, that means Doctor of Physical Therapy. And she's a certified orthopedic specialist who also has certifications in active release technique, which I like very much, and Graston technique, which I also recommend. So what can you tell us about the snap, crackle, and pop that we seem to be hearing all the time?
Hi, Deborah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
This is a great question and a question that I get a lot. People are often worried about the sounds they might hear from their joints. Some people like to crack their own joints and get a very satisfying response from it, but they're not quite sure if it's okay to do it or not. So let's talk about it. There's a few different reasons why your joints might crack. But just to know, on the whole, if there's no pain with the cracking, it's not alarming. It's okay. So you don't have to worry. If there is a pain associated with it, then that's a reason to get it checked out. All right. So let's talk about I'm going to go through three different reasons. The first one is called cavitation, and with a C, cavitation. And that's the sound that you hear when you might crack your knuckles. Sometimes just like I used to have actually a boss whose ankles used to crack when he would walk. He'd never sneak up on you because it was crack, crack, crack. And that was cavitation. When I first get out of bed in the morning, I step, my feet go crack, 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 and I know that's cavitation because I know that's what's happening. It's also, if you've ever been to a chiropractor or a physical therapist who's done a manipulation, maybe to your back or another joint, and you get that little pop, that's also cavitation. So why does this happen? As you know, if you're creating a little bit of a force through the joint, and that's when it pops. Okay. In the joints, there's something called synovial fluid. Okay. And in that fluid, there's nitrogen, there's carbon dioxide, there's oxygen. And when you put a force through the joint, like cracking your knuckles or cracking your back, there's a negative pressure that happens on this fluid, and it pulls that nitrogen into these gas bubbles, which then release and pop. And that's actually what's causing the sound. So it doesn't have to do with your bones. It doesn't have to do with your ligaments or anything like that. It's actually gas bubbles. It's bubbles popping. So that's the
Oh,
pop.
no.
Snap, crackle, pop. Yeah, snap, crackle, pop. Uh, so another kind of question that people ask, well, is it okay for me to do that? People worry about, maybe grandma has said, don't crack your knuckles, you're going to get arthritis. You're not going to get arthritis, but you need to be careful because if you stress your joint or push it into a position that's gone a little too far, you could sprain some ligaments. Basically, you could kind of hurt some soft tissue, but nothing serious is going to happen.
So I have a question for you, Bridget. What if it drives you crazy? You've got a boss or somebody who's always cracking their knuckles or
Mhm.
popping their back, and you would really like them to stop. Is there any advice you can give us about gently suggesting to people that they not do this?
That's a good question. You could tell them that it's bothersome. You could explain why it's happening, and you could tell them, just be careful. Warn them if you go a little too far, you might stretch something out, but you can't tell them they're going to get arthritis for it.
Okay, so we
You
can't
tell
we
them, you
can't
tell them it's
spread
annoying.
misinformation.
You can tell them it's annoying.
So what are some of the other reasons? I think you mentioned some other reasons for this.
Yeah, so there's another one. Let's say you're in the gym, for example, and you're doing a lot of repetitions, with your shoulder, or maybe you're doing leg lifts or something like that, and you get this sort of like snap sound. Oftentimes, what that is a tendon that's like moving over a bone. So you have areas, let's say like the front of your hip, if you kind of feel there's like little kind of bony prominences, we call them. There's areas where tendons attach, or they might pass over a bone and attach just above it. And sometimes if the muscle's like a little bit tight, or there's an imbalance in the strength around the joint so that some muscles are kind of working a little harder than others, it can cause those tendons to do like a little snapping motion over that piece of bony prominence. Now,
Is that what we call snapping tendon syndrome?
yeah, yeah, oftentimes people refer to it as snapping tendon. It's just sort of doing like a little snap over over a like a bump or a prominence on the bone.
Like a rubber band or something.
You could, yeah, you could, that's a good analogy. So is this dangerous? No, it can be annoying. If you have it and you know, constantly are creating that sound over and over and doing lots of reps, you might irritate it. So that's something that you need to watch out for. But you don't have to be alarmed, you know, in the moment that it's happening. How do you get rid of it? Well, oftentimes you have to determine like where, you know, let's look at my range of motion. Maybe I am a little restricted in the front of my hips, or maybe I have some weakness in an area around the joint, and then strengthening and, you know, finding someone to help you, a trainer or a physical therapist to guide you through what you need to properly strengthen and stretch should resolve that.
That's excellent. I
Uh,
think it's a good idea probably to ask your physical therapist or your doctor if you're concerned.
mhm. Yeah, because it's helpful to have that guidance to know exactly what needs to be strengthened and what exercises you should be doing to balance things out so that you no longer get that snapping sound. Okay.
And then you mentioned a third reason for noisy
So,
joints.
so a third reason, and we're kind of going through the like like injury reasons, let's say. The third one is just older joints. So as we get older, the cartilage that coats the surfaces of our joints on the bone, it just starts to thin out and it starts to wear away a little bit. So when that happens, the surfaces are a little bit rougher. So when you're moving through the joints, it can cause a little bit more of a, it can cause sort of that crackly sound just because it's rougher. Now, here's where you have to determine, does it hurt or not? Okay, if it doesn't hurt, you really don't have to worry about it. Good advice would be to make sure you're doing an exercise routine and you're strengthening. And again, it's good to get some guidance for that to make sure you prevent anything from happening. But really where it's where you need to see somebody is if it hurts. If you're getting pain with that kind of crunchy sound. That means you're getting a little too much friction in there, and then you need to address that. And oftentimes the remedy for that is exercise. The reason for that is the stronger you are around the joint, the better supported it is, and the better the joint moves. Okay, the better it moves, the less likely those joint surfaces are to come too much in contact with each other. And I have kind of a fun analogy for this. If you think about a door hinge, okay, on a door. If
Yes.
it's installed properly, you can open and close that door many, many times, and the hinge is not going to squeak. It's going to glide really nicely. Okay. If, let's say, you take a little kid and he hangs on the door handle, he's hanging on it while you're opening and closing the door, that puts some stress on the hinge, right? And so it's probably going to start rubbing a little bit and making a sound. So take the little kid off and straighten things out, and you can open and close it again, and it's not making a sound. So take your knees, for example. If muscles in one area are stronger than muscles in the other area, then when you bend and straighten, it may not move as well. You know, one part of the joint might actually start to rub a little bit. So that's why strengthening with some guidance to balance things out can be very, very helpful and can make that pain go away.
That's such a good analogy. I like the idea of, you know, the squeaky door syndrome. We don't want scary movies. We want a nice, seamless door that doesn't cry out when we're opening it. I have one more question that just occurred to me, and that's about crepitation. And I've noticed that a lot of times when people haven't moved for a long time, in their neck and shoulders, there will be that gritty kind of, and sometimes I'm not sure it's noisy, but it's internally noisy. You know that there's like sand or something. It feels like there's sand gumming up the works of your joint. And yet, if you do gentle ranges of motion on a regular basis, it's like ball bearings. The noise goes away. There's no stuttering when you're making a range of motion with your shoulder. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Sure. So another great analogy is to think of your joints like a car engine. Okay. We already talked about how there's fluid in there in the joints. This is synovial fluid. You want that fluid to be coating all the surfaces of the joint, just like you want oil to be coating all the surfaces inside a car engine. Okay. When you're not moving for, because it lubricates it. Okay. So like think of an engine lubricant. If you're not moving for a while or moving much or sitting, all of that joint fluid just kind of settles, right? And it's not really coating the surfaces that well. So that's when things feel, and then when they're not, it's not coated as well. And then this is especially in older joints that have less, have thinning cartilage, then you're more likely to feel that, to hear that kind of crunchy, like not smooth feeling in the joints. As long as you're moving, we say, this is kind of cheesy, but we say motion is lotion.
Yes.
As long as you're moving, it keeps those surfaces lubricated, and then you're less likely to have that rubbing. And that explains why if you, sometimes when you first get up in the morning, joints can feel a little bit creaky, and then you start moving and then they stop making those sounds. But over time also, it's just on a daily basis, the more movement you do, the more your joints are going to be coated with that fluid throughout the day, and the less noisy and the more comfortable they'll be.
You know, I've heard that motion is lotion in another context, and that's arthritis.
Mhm.
That really the single most indicated thing for arthritis is exercise. And sometimes people don't like to hear that, but apparently it's the most effective thing that a lot of people know of.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And there are two reasons for that. One of the main parts is that constant motion, keeping those joints lubricated. Because if you have arthritis already, then you know those joint surfaces are not in their prime condition, right? So you want them as lubricated as possible. And then also, just going back to that squeaky door analogy, the exercise to strengthen the muscles to make sure that that arthritic joint is moving the best it can possibly move is going to reduce any friction in there.
Well, this has been so enlightening. Thank you so much, Bridget, for explaining these mysteries of pop, snapping, crackling, and popping. I mean, it makes me think of actually breakdancing. You see these kids, you know, putting their shoulders in these absolutely amazing positions, which I'm not convinced are very good for them. But I think they call that.
They are. I do want to mention, we talked about how without pain, the cracking's not an issue. And there's other things that can cause painful sounds of the joints. And then, you know, definitely want to get them checked out. So like if you feel like you have sustained an injury, or you've like hurt yourself or fallen, you know, sometimes like a tear in a cartilage or in something like that can cause, like in a labrum, which is inside joints, can cause those sounds also. And that's something that needs to be addressed. So just really have to go by whether you feel pain or not when feeling these sounds.
Yes, I think there's a very scary sound that's associated with a knee injury, and people know it right away.
Yeah, meniscus in the knee, like if it has a significant tear, it can cause kind of a catching, and there can be a little noise with that. So those are really the times when you need to go seek treatment. But that just sort of gentle snap, crackle, and pop that doesn't hurt, you really don't have to worry about it.
All right, so we'll be moving and keeping our motion lotioning and avoiding the snapping and crackling and popping. And I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing all this wonderful information with us, Bridget. And we hope to see you back really soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Deborah.